All right. Jack Barsky, former KGB spy. Please introduce yourself for the audience that does not know you.
Well, you just introduced me, and you're an exception to the rule that you actually know what KGB stands for, because I had a live interview on stage at a high school, and to that audience, I had to explain what communism is, what the KGB was. So we don't teach a lot of history in school in the United States, but anyway, that sidebar. Introduce myself. So born and raised in the eastern section of Germany, born right after 4 years after the end of the World War II, and spent the first 26 years in Germany. Went to school, high school, college. Got a master's degree in chemistry. And oh, by the way, I aced high school and college. So just was like, I know. I got to brag a little bit, right? but but that and my activities in the Communist Youth League in East Germany. Your audience may not know this, but East Germany was a communist vassal state of the Soviet Union. It was originally occupied by the Soviet Army after World War II. And then it became a state that was very much dependent and pretty from a distant government by the Soviet state. So in the KGB, the intelligence service for the Soviet Union was free to operate in East Germany. So I don't know this for a fact, but based on my records, then everybody in East Germany every adult had a file somewhere in the archive of that was kept by the Stasi. That was the East German version of the KGB, and so the KGB most likely had access to the records, and they were looking around for candidates for this very unusual job, the most difficult job in intelligence. That is, an undercover illegal. That means you and working only as a lone wolf. In other words, undercover means you're undercover. Illegal means you're operating under a stolen name or under some kind of a fictitious name, not your own name. And lone wolf, you never have a team meeting. You don't never have a team to discuss things with. You got to make your own decision. And that's a really, really tough, and it requires a certain set of talents that they were searching for. Well, number one talent is you have to be really smart. All right. And so they found I'm smart. And number two, what they were looking for is staunch communists. And I was. So they sent somebody out to talk to me. And long story short, after I had an 18-month informal relationship with a local agent in the town where I studied, and even worked for a year as an assistant professor. After 18 months of me and him, having an informal relationship where we talked about the possibilities of going to the West as an agent, and we talked about everything in life. So he studied me, and he figured that I was a good candidate for being recruited, and so I was recruited. And it took me a while to. Actually, they didn't give me a lot of time. But I would have liked to have had more time to say yes or no. And but eventually, I said yes because there's a few things. First of all, I knew that the KGB was the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet in those years. So that flattered me. They made me an offer. I knew that in the West, living in the West would not be a bad thing because the standard of living was much higher. And I knew that I was joining a good cause because I was a believer in communism, and I was going to see the world, part of the world of this world were not accessible to us. We were not allowed to travel to the West, and I wanted to go to Paris and Rome and places like that. And eventually, what really nailed the thing for me is the flattery. My ego got such a huge boost that I just couldn't say no. So I said yes. And oh, you want to say something?
Yeah. So, and it's just it's a bit of a follow up question. So, the way that you're describing how the KGB worked is a lot like how the CIA in the United States works, and and like in the recruitment part
Yep.
of it, right? And you know, and the personality profile of the individual that gets picked, right? Which
Yeah,
is
you're right.
generally,
Let me interrupt you. This is you're very well informed. Uh, it's pretty much common knowledge that the CIA used to recruit exclusively in Ivy League schools. But what you stated is not well known. I have a friend who was a very well known agent in the CIA. Um, yeah, now and then. The name will come back to me. You may have interviewed him already. And when we met and we talked about what the KGB was looking for in candidates, he said, "Well, that's identical to what we were looking for, except there's one exception. I don't think the CIA could recruit for the job that I did. That means an illegal undercover agent. They recruited for agents in general, but they were looking for the same, talents and character traits as the KGB. Go on.
yeah. So, well, the reason I'm saying I think you're referring to Andrew Bustamante. Am
Nope.
I? It's not okay, because he always talks about it. But so I've interviewed many CIA agents, first of all, and I've also listened to many talks with Andrew Bustamante, who used to work for the CIA, who has also been on Lex's podcast. And with him, they describe the individual that works for the CIA as like somebody who wants to travel, generally pretty intelligent, young, preferably. I'm trying to think. You hit on a few other things, but when you were describing it, it sounds exactly like U.S. intelligence, right? In terms of who they're looking for exactly. And
Well, and very flexible. Not like afraid of new stuff. It's just like, and then when I saw a list of the things that they were looking for that became available to the public because of a couple of interviews, I said, "Well, yeah, that's me."
yeah, and I also want to say this too about just in general about the interview. I'm doing this interview right after I interviewed a Ukrainian journalist who actually met with Vladimir Putin when she was 19. All right, and she's 42 now, right? So this is when, and this question has been like in my head for like the past week or so, and I've been wanting to ask you this. So you've been asked about Putin, I'm sure, like a million times. But with this lady, she met Putin when she was 19 at a conference, right? Like it was a journalist conference, whatever, something like that. And she was in college at the time, and she actually did meet with Vladimir Putin, right? She's 42 now, and she was 19 then, so that's 23 years difference. So that was like when Putin was first president, right? So that definitely says something about how different he is, because he was not what he is today. And the main thing when I'm like, what did you learn from meeting him, right? Because not many people do. She was like, he seemed, she said like a few things, one of which was that he seemed soulless. But one of the other things is that he seemed almost distracted. Like, not like I'm not interested in this conversation, but like he was anxious, right? Like his mind was in a few different places, but he seemed like nervous when she met him. And what that also reminded me of was Tucker Carlson, when he did his interview recently, he said the same thing, that he felt like an overprepared student. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
On what? On Putin or the Tucker Carlson interview?
Just the fact that two separate people, one that met him 23 years ago and
Yeah.
one that met him like now, they both said that he just seemed extremely weak internally and just overall very nervous, almost like overprepared.
Well, obviously, when you're in the same room with a person, you read some things that don't come across on the screen. But based on what I saw in the Tucker Carlson interview, uh, Putin dominated. He made sure that Tucker couldn't ask any questions he wouldn't want to answer. And if there's one word that can describe Vladimir Putin, he's cagey. He is clever. He outmaneuvers a lot of people that he interacts with. Have you ever seen that video clip where when he was meeting with Angela Merkel? She was the German chancellor, and
Yeah.
Putin knew that Merkel was afraid of dogs, so he had a dog sitting by his side, a big dog. And also the interaction that he had with Donald Trump, it was not very favorable for Trump. So, what's going on with it is very, very advantageous if you allow the person you're talking with to underestimate you, because fundamentally Tucker didn't get any question in there that would have challenged some of the lies that came out of Putin. So this was, in my view, not a good interview, because I know a little more about the history of Russia and so forth, and at least I would have asked, if I'm Tucker, I would have asked Vladimir what he thought about when Stalin killed over 1 million people during something that was called Holodomor, when he took all the grain away from the folks in the Ukraine to force collectivization. He could have asked that, didn't get to it. So don't underestimate Vladimir Putin.
Well, I'm just speaking because I've never met the guy, right? I've never met Putin as of yet. So with him, the only two things I know about him from a personal perspective is, again, the journalist I just interviewed, who, this was well before the war in Ukraine, and she's a Ukrainian citizen, and she just is in this conference at 19, and she just feels like he was like thinking about like every single thing in like almost to like a nervous degree. I'm saying about the comments that both Tucker and
I understand, but there's one thing is to have a feeling. It's another thing to look at the success that this man had. You can't be like weak or constantly like arguing with yourself. You have to have some focus. I think that he's putting on an act, whether that's deliberately or just instinctively. He managed to outlive Stalin as far as the length of time he's been in power. In one of the largest powers on the planet. I mean, you can, without admiring him, you can clearly call him the most successful statesman in the last like several decades. And a lot of American politicians would envy his success. One of them probably Donald Trump, even though Donald is not a dictator. So I just want to make sure that to not be misquoted.
Well, do you think, because I've asked people about Putin and just his personality, because it does seem like a fascinating individual, right? Just everything, just how you gain all this money and power and success it's interesting, and the type of person that creates.
Can I direct you to a phenomenal video that I just discovered on YouTube? I think you can just find it when you search for it. It is about how Putin started and how he became who he is today. He started as a nothing, as a nobody. He was one of several thousand within the KGB. He was like a mid-level bureaucrat in East Germany. He was not highly regarded by one of his bosses. I met Oleg Kalugin, who Putin once reported to, and yet he managed to slowly move the way up and change in the process his personality. He went for like an easygoing, easy person to work with, who was no threat to anybody, to a feared individual. Okay, that video will give you a lot of insights, I believe, because there's some truth in there that I know to be true. Because I worked with people like him in East Germany. They weren't really like star agents. They were bureaucrats, okay? And they did a little bit of espionage, but mostly they were liaison with the Stasi and maybe did some courier work or managed the relationship with candidates like me.
Well, do you think that and I've heard the act thing too. I asked someone I talk to very often about he worked in U.S. intelligence, and when him and I spoke, I asked him about Putin. I'm like, why doesn't he do more interviews with English journalists? And I thought to myself that it was likely because he doesn't know English, right? And so he doesn't want to be caught up in something like that. But then the answer that he gave me was that his words were that the act of like stumbling over his words in English, it's a method of trying to gauge trust with the individual. Is that true? Like that would be something he would do?
I
Yeah.
don't know, but let me tell you one thing that may not come to your attention. When he interviews with whoever, when he gives public interviews, he speaks primarily to his home audience, period, because his focus is on staying in power, and he has managed to do so incredibly well. And because right now, even though there's a war going on and there's soldiers dying and the economy is not doing so well, he still is a popular president in Russia because he's playing the card that you of a strong man so very well. And historically, and that's in the Russian national DNA, they've always yearned for a strong man to protect them from the outside threat. And these threats were real. Russia has been invaded so many times in history. And he's playing this very, very well. He doesn't care what the West, and at one point, he thought he wanted to have some good relations with the West. And then something happened, I forgot, that he himself interpreted as an invasion coming. And so he switched. And from that point on, he doesn't care what the United States or Germany thinks of Vladimir Putin.
Well, Putin is, again, at the center of a lot, right? And one of the things that I was also going to ask is, with regards to the nervousness, could it be a form of situational awareness that his mind is on other things and he is thinking about other things, or he's thinking about every possibility of the conversation? He's trying to make sure it goes perfectly, almost like an extreme focus that can come off as like almost a nervousness.
Well, you described also something that is that people display that suffer from ADD. My mind wanders all the time. And I have to really focus on what the other person is saying. That could be something like that. But I'm out of my sandbox to talk about this thing. I have no expertise in human behavior. You would have to interview one of my friends who at one point led the behavioral division for the FBI. He might have a more of an educated opinion about this. So sorry, I can't help you.
No, it's all good. I just thought I would ask. And I also wanted to say, and I thought about this too when I was thinking about this interview, is that Putin comes from a bit of a unique background when it comes to being a world leader, right? In the sense that he comes from the perspective of espionage, correct? Like, because he did work in the KGB.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah. So he comes from the perspective of espionage, which is it. I don't know if unusual is the right word, but I don't hear about presidents, at least not in the West, coming from the background of espionage and spying, right? It's usually a military background or just a political background, or sometimes a celebrity background, right? Or a position of power in general, not usually espionage. I think
that's a very astute observation. I can't think of anybody at this point, scanning real quick my memory, that there's somebody like Putin who raised to the very top out of the career in espionage. Yeah, you're right. Now, the next question that I get asked a lot: what did Vladimir Putin learn in the KGB that made him so successful? The only thing that he learned he could use was he learned how to lie. Nothing else. Everything else.
Yeah. I was gonna say that's the recipe for a great politician, but go on.
Yeah, well, uh, everything else he acquired as he made his march towards the top. Now, he was a good organizer, and as I said, he was so easy to get along with. There's a parallel that initially Stalin was thought to be that's not, it wasn't Stalin, it was Khrushchev. Khrushchev was, nobody thought he was a danger to anybody. And but when it was time to take over, he showed a different side of himself. So it's the knowledge of how to fit in and how to make the best of the situation. And Putin did this perfectly well. And now he's at the top. And just today I saw in the news that his government just is putting 3 scientists in jail that were working on the hypersonic missile system because they gave us a talk abroad among other scientists about hypersonic technology. 10 plus years for old men in jail just to scare them, to scare the rest of them. And that's how some people fall out of windows, to scare others, to just like stay in line. And just when people ask me, would I ever want to go back to Moscow and visit? I says, no, there's too many open windows. I'm not on a list of like enemies of the state way up. If there's a list, it's way down, but they still would try it because that scares the rest of them. You see, we get you even so many years later. So
yeah. So once an enemy, always an enemy, right?
Yeah.
But what I find to be interesting about, and this is moving away from Putin, but it's Russia today, or actually, okay, this isn't entirely moving away from Putin, but you touched on something important, which is the mysterious deaths, or as you would say, arranged accidents. I remember listening to that on Lex's podcast, is that a lot of accidents can be arranged, right?
Yeah.
And with regards to Putin, something that kind of I feel like got swept under the rug a little bit was with Prigozhin, where Prigozhin goes in, tries to infiltrate the country, and then he meets with the director of the CIA too, which I think is suspicious for sure while that's happening. And he gets into Moscow and he's about to take over the country, and then all of a sudden he gets arranged a meeting with Putin, and then they both just come to this magical agreement, and Prigozhin leaves to Poland, never to be seen again, or not never to be seen again, but not in Russia, exiled from his country. And then next thing you know, he's on a plane and the plane crashes and he's just dead. So, is that an example of what you're talking about?
Well, that is really a mystery to me, how a fox like Prigozhin would not have his team thoroughly investigate the vehicle, the plane that he's about to enter. I mean, I can't imagine. So I don't think that anybody knows the truth of what happened there. The one thing is clear, that Prigozhin was perceived a threat to Putin, even though he was not. His intent was not to take over. His intent was to maybe take over the leading role in the war against Ukraine and get the right credit for it. Okay, and he overestimated what he could do with that march on Moscow, and this was just plain stupid. What can I tell you? Serves him right. He was a bastard killer. Okay, but There's some things in this world of intelligence or intelligence-related arenas where we will never know the truth because it will die with only one person that has it in their mind. And in this case, if Putin was the man who said do that, well, there must have been more than one person who has knowledge, but you never know. Are they still alive?
I mean, look, when it comes to a guy like him, I don't think there's really any accidents. If one of his enemies just mysteriously dies in a plane crash, and then you get Alexei Navalny, who mysteriously dies in prison, who that's debatable because people, it was like right during, I forget what it was during it, but regardless, there's the argument that it could have hindered his public perception. I don't know. I just think it's interesting for sure that every political enemy of his ends up dying in a mysterious accident.
Well, I think you're overstating this. Not everyone. The one he has some that he controls very well. That stay in line, and he needs those to to at least give the perception to the West that there's some democracy and that we have elections and so forth. Now, the most recent election was like clearly fraudulent to a large degree. Not all of them have been. And oh, by the way, Western organizations have done studies, have conducted polls, and still find that the majority of Russians support Putin, even though they don't all vote for him. So, but this what I think Putin had 80% or something like that. Come on.
Well, it's kind of like how in North Korea. Well, North Korea is a different story, and
yeah,
but North Korea is on a much even more extreme than them. But the point is that it is interesting that in a lot of these dictatorships, it's always like 100% overwhelming approval, no matter what.
Yeah, I can tell you when I went to vote in East Germany, we had a block, 5 parties, the Communist Party and 4 others, but the 4 others were just subordinate to the communists. I had some communist supervisors, and so when it came to the election, we had a slate of candidates, and they were from a united front. So you had 2 choices. You either check yes or you check no. And if you check no, somebody behind you might actually notice that, and then you go for an interview with the Stasi. 95% for the United Front, never any lower. Ridiculous. And everybody with a half a brain knows that this is impossible to happen.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, that is how dictatorships work, unfortunately. It's, the second there's any questioning, and it gets more and more extreme over time. I mean, we saw with Stalin, I'm not too familiar. Like, I'm not, A to Z, know everything about the guy. But, a lot of dictators, they go crazy at the end of their lives, right? And they usually die, I think, in a lot of fear. Hitler and Stalin definitely died in a lot of fear. And
paranoia, my friend, and paranoia it keeps you. It's a survival mechanism, because for every 10 dangers that you see, 1 is real. So you take care of 9 of them by proactively killing enemies that really didn't plan anything, but you catch the 10th one in the process. So Napoleon lived long that way. Hitler would have survived longer in Germany had it not for the victory of the Allies. Stalin died in his bed, and on and on. So, yeah, and there's a craziness around. Absolutely, now, paranoia will destroy you. There's a famous song about. It's mental illness for sure.
Well, you know the story about Stalin and the doctors, correct?
Oh yeah, the Jewish doctors. He had him killed because when he didn't feel well, he thought they were and somebody may have actually told him to think about those lines, that they sabotaged his health. Yes. And I
Well,
and I tell you what, Putin is paranoid too. You remember that picture where he sat opposite, I think, the French premier, like at a table that is yay long during COVID?
yes, I know what you're talking about.
Bizarre. Okay, that's paranoia.
Well, allegedly, and I'm sure you've heard about this allegation that, or not allegation, but supposedly, I should really say, that he has cancer, right? And
Wait. Whoa, 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 whoa. There's so many rumors going around, but there's one fellow who is a medical doctor with whom I've had some interaction. He's very credible. He's been watching Putin from a distance, and he said there's no signs of any serious illness. All right, so it's always good for set of eyeballs on the TV or people buying your magazine or whatever, for the experts to get into the limelight, to invent things like that. You fake news, man.
I'm just saying what I've heard. I'm just saying that
Yeah,
is a very common rumor.
and I don't have evidence to the contrary, but I take these things with a grain of salt. Did the guy look ill in the interview with Carlson? I don't think he looked ill. He dominated that interview. Absolutely dominated. He spoke 75% of the time.
There was a funny comment I think I saw. It was like the top comment on the Carlson interview. And it says, could you imagine if a Russian journalist came to America and started interviewing our president like that? It wouldn't go the same way, right? In Russian, interviewing either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, it wouldn't go the same way.
No, we would be a little more polite, I think.
Maybe. Well, what's interesting, I don't want to make a whole interview about Putin. I want to go on to other things. But I had a question I was going to ask you too. Okay. Actually, you know what? So with regards to your career in spying, right? And when you were spying in the United States, this was before you converted, or, what word would you use between your transition?
Okay, so clarify this for me. Word to describe what?
Your transition from KGB to, I guess, American citizen, like defector.
Oh, it was very gradual. See, the brainwashing that I got as a child and a young person in East Germany, brainwashing is extremely sticky. It's very difficult to get rid of your beliefs that were planted in your subconscious mind when you were young. And I have evidence for that because I met when I had the ability to go back to Germany after sort of like 50 years and meet again with friends and fellow students of mine way back when. A lot of them were still, if not full-blown communists, but they still had a lot of pink in them. They still thought that East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, was actually a good place to be, and we just had the wrong leadership. The communist cause itself, they never got rid of it. So my transition was very gradual. I knew when I came here that standard of living was significantly higher, and so that didn't bother me because I also knew that the United States was an imperialist country that stole a lot of stuff from the third world. So, but then the next thing is, as I got a job in corporate America, and I was treated really well, and I didn't feel like I was exploited. So here was another one. The evil capitalists. I had some bad bosses, but I didn't meet any really evil capitalists, the way they were depicted in the East. And slowly but surely, I thought, man, it's not a bad place. Are you familiar with the convergence theory?
No.
Okay, so the convergence, in short, the convergence theory was cooked up by social democrat parties in some NATO states that they stated that capitalism and socialism would converge and form something like the welfare state that you see now in some European countries. You know, to take the good of capitalism, which is competition, and I knew that American companies were so much more efficient than in East Germany because there was no competition. So all you had to do was show up for work and you didn't have to perform very well. You made the same money as the guy next to you who worked his ass off. So I knew, and so I figured, but I still believed in, you know, taking care of all the people that need to be taken care of. Now, yes and no, but not the way I thought. So I was at a point when I quit the KGB, I was still a patriotic East German citizen. I still had a belief in modified socialism and was not yet anti-communist and was not yet pro-America. That changed when a year after I quit the KGB, the Berlin Wall came down, and everybody was really surprised, and so was I. So I had to find out what was going on there, because I thought the East Germans were still doing quite well because they always did well in the Olympics, you know. And I hadn't been there for a long time, so I didn't know what was going on in the country. But anyway, so now I had the means to find out a little bit about the history. So because the internet was already available to do searches, and slowly but surely, I found out the truth. I found out that my hero, Vladimir Lenin, was not the man that we were taught he was, that the man who sacrificed his life, his health, and eventually his life to help all the oppressed in the world. And he was also the man who implemented the Red Terror to kill a lot of quote unquote enemies of the revolution. He became a dictator, not the same way Stalin was a dictator. He didn't kill as many, but he killed a lot of people. And that was not known to us. He was a good, kind man. So, and more I found out that all of communism, and Marxism, Leninism, all of this was just a big old lie. You know, I had eyes open and ears open to hear and see. And, you know, I could not continue to believe what I was taught when I was younger. And then I became an American patriot after 6/11. It's 9/11. I'm sorry. It's 6 is June. And when I took a course on an online course on the American Constitution, I finally understood that I live in a country that is the only country in the world that has been organized to manage evil, not eradicate it, because communism was going to eradicate evil. But when you look at the history of mankind, you know, every century man was able to kill more fellow men because of better weapons. And it's throughout history, there was nothing but killing. I'm not talking about crime by one or two people. We're talking about by countries or organizations. And I'm firmly convinced that evil it is hard to eliminate, fundamentally impossible to eliminate. And the Constitution, the separation of power, is, in my view, the only way for organizations such a particularly big organization, such as governments, to turn from evil, because there's a constraint, there's a restraint. So now, after so many years, and I'm now emotionally, legally, intellectually, and spiritually American, more so than I've ever been German. And if you gave me, let's say $1 million, I would not move to Germany and live there, because I don't like it there. I've been back there. It's the German military discipline, militaristic discipline bothers me. And you think they have freedom? They're governed from above. but there is some democracy, and it's not like Germany is not in danger of degrading into a dictatorship at this point. But the Weimar Republic gave power to Hitler, and the Weimar Republic was also a democracy. So there was no separation of powers. Anyway, I'm ranting on, but you asked me for the for the changeover. It was a very gradual process. Took about 15 years.
Well, I also wanted to ask about when you did your espionage in America, right? Because from what it sounds like, you looked into America and you were told to, to find information about it, and you found information and you liked them more than this, and then communism. But with regards to what you learned about how America's structured when you were doing espionage, what do you have to say about that? About what you actually learned from, your operations about America itself?
Well, initially, I didn't learn that much because I had preconceived notions, and I didn't purposely study American government because I had some tasks, but I got to tell you one thing, and you probably will be surprised. Uh, what was most important for the KGB with regard to me being in the United States was me being in the United States and living as an American undetected. Simply because towards the end of the Cold War, there were these espionage wars, and there was a good chance that diplomatic relations were broken up altogether. And in those days, there were two very, very dangerous moles in the United States government. They were the most successful Soviet agents during the Cold War, and there was Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen. I'm sure you know who they were. And no diplomats left. There were no other spies except for us illegals. So we were the insurance policy in case the Cold War would just heat up the way it did not, thank God. So I had some tasks, but they really, I operated as a spotter to see if I could find some talent that might be recruited for the cause. And I also once was asked to steal some technology that I wasn't very successful for that. In those days, technology was on the do not export list, but you couldn't go in the store and buy that. So it was also don't have it available for retail. And I was told that it would be really great if I could meet somebody who either works in the State Department or influences foreign policy. I was socially, in my standing in society was not high enough that I could have a believable reason to try to befriend people like that. So I really didn't have a lot of incentive to study the functioning of the government. I knew the elections, and I knew Congress, and I knew the Supreme Court. Obviously, I did, and I always sided with the Democrats. I voted several times. That in and of itself was a crime, and I always voted Democrat because at least they were a little closer to where I still was, which was nowadays, if I still was subject to the same ideology, I would be a rather far left Democrat. So, so I can't, I'm sorry, I have to answer the way I just answered because there wasn't anything else to talk about. There isn't anything else to talk about. That my realization of how this all functions and how it stops to some degree functioning, that's all recently acquired knowledge when I started actually doing the studying.
So, one thing I noticed when I was actually watching your interview with Lex to prepare for this, right? In one of the comments, or a lot of the comments, people were making jokes that, well, about you and Lex having affiliation with Russian intelligence. And people are always making these comments about people that work for intelligence, once a CIA agent, always a CIA agent, or once a Russian asset, always a Russian asset, or, Russian asset interviews another Russian asset. What do you have to say to those comments?
First of all, who came up with the idea that Lex was a Russian agent?
Those are the comments. Those are the comments.
Well,
I'm not.
that's just plain stupid. There's no evidence for that. I mean, he's Ukrainian who was born in Russia. Uh, I think still under communism, but he came over here rather early. So I, I have
These are all
never,
YouTube comments.
you
Yeah.
got no YouTube comments. You got to be very careful of. I don't fundamentally read them anymore. Occasionally, I don't even read comments about me because, everybody has an agenda and then they want to be funny and yeah, just stay away from that stuff. There has not been one single credible source that I'm aware of that would have said something like that. And well, period. And I'm still following the media. I'm following, not that I watch a lot of television because there's a lot of nonsense on television, but I'm following, particularly podcasts and streaming news, and I when I want to know something more closer to the truth about the United States, I'm going to BBC because they don't have an agenda. Okay, they're an outside observer.
Right. Well, I was just referencing because every time an intelligence agent gets interviewed, like Mike Baker, who worked for the CIA, who was on Joe Rogan, people always make that comment. They're always like saying, "There's no such thing as a former CIA agent. There's no
Well,
such thing."
there's one thing for sure, and I know this because I'm living it. There is one such a thing as an ex-KGB agent who has completely left the world of intelligence, and that can be. I know a bunch of CIA agents retired, and they make a living doing things similar to what I'm doing, giving public speaking or consulting, team building, leadership. I know quite a few people like that, and yeah, they use the capital that they acquired during their service, but they're not active in intelligence anymore. Same thing here. I'm using what I learned during, among other things, during my time as an agent, and also looking back, growing up in East Germany. But I'm not that anymore. So I would be very. These are cynical, stupid comments by a bunch of idiots. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's you know that's how you feel. That's it's valid.
No,
I
that's
mean,
that's what I no no. That's what I know. It's not a feeling, because this is just what these statements are just not true. There may be some people who are like that, and I know personally one retired agent, and I'm not even going to say what service he retired from, uh, who is still a liar. Actually, I know two. Actually, they still lie, and they're most likely not aware that they're lying because lying had become sort of what they were so used to doing while operating in intelligence. I lied all the time. I had to. It was the big lie that I wasn't born in the United States, and then came all the little lies, like, where did you go to school, or blah blah blah. I got to a point when I lived here long enough that those questions disappeared, and I only had to tell the truth about what happened to me in the last 5, 6 years. So, lying can become part of you, and that happens. But I have uh, about 25 friends who retired from intelligence, and there's only two of them who I've caught lying, not persistently, but two of them clearly uh, that actually spoke a very, very big lie, probably not aware of that, that the lie was so stupid that it was also obvious to be a lie.
well, now this is something I do feel strongly about is the subject of lying, right? Because I'm a big supporter of telling the truth as much as you can, right?
Yeah,
And
me
if
too.
it's yeah, and if it's not true, you shouldn't say it, right? Like you shouldn't. if you can't say something without lying, don't say it, right? And so, and tell the truth as much as you can, because lying becomes a habit, and it's rooted in not good, right? In bad.
No,
So
absolutely true. But here's one thing: you to tell the truth to the extent you know it. And every time you repeat something that you got from a second hand, you don't even know that it's the truth or a lie. And you don't have the capacity to find out what is 100% true or not. So just be careful how you say, I know for a fact, when you don't know for a fact. And when you have to like phrase it in a different way, I believe that may be true because the source is trustworthy.
yeah, and you're absolutely right. People do use secondhand information all the time that they aren't entirely sure is true, and it's not entirely their opinion, which is a form of dishonesty to yourself, because they don't really know what's true. They just know that somebody else said it, and therefore they go along with it.
Yeah, but you
And
cannot operate in this world to know everything that you're dealing with, because the world is so complicated. Our brain, as much as it can hold, can't hold the truth about the entire world. Okay, so it
yeah,
is what it is. The, believe it or not, our existence is not between black and white. It's in the gray area, and we just have to manage it as well as we can and not deliberately lie. And I don't do that anymore.
and that, and yeah, that goes into my next question, which is, when it comes to young people, since you lived such a, you know, not unusual, but a very different life for most people, I would say, for sure. You know, what advice would you give to young people?
With regard to lying or with regard
With
to
regards to anything, like
life?
what advice? If you
Okay.
had to give it to even your younger self, maybe.
Yeah. Uh, Particularly, and I have a son who operates in a way where he limits his life experiences. What my number one advice is: go out and do something. So, when people go to school and then they stay home and play video games, they isolate themselves. People go to work and they play home, play video games, or maybe just maybe talk to somebody on FaceTime. Go out and mingle. We are meant to be with others. The suicide rate during COVID and now after COVID has, particularly among young people, have gone down. There is enough evidence provided by psychologists that loneliness is uh, the biggest killer amongst young people, because they we were the hunters and gatherers were a team, and ever since then we worked in teams in some way. So go out and do something, join a cause, do something physical, be in the face of other people, not through a screen. Experience the whole person, which is when the screen hides a lot of things. For instance, you could make some gestures with your hands, but that I don't see, and like you could show me the finger, and I don't even see it. And then there's the smell and all the other senses that we have. This is very important to live a full life as a human being. And the other thing is just stay away from negative emotions. They always come back to haunt you. They echo back. Don't be angry. Don't hate, because it really kills you on the inside. I have one negative emotion left, and that's I get annoyed. When somebody cuts me off in traffic or somebody plants himself in front of the supermarket, not aware that I'm coming behind and that kind of, but that lasts only very little. I am not angry with anybody because it doesn't make a difference. Because let's say you tell somebody I'm angry with you, and you think that's the reason they're going to change. They're going to change because you're angry with them. Most of the time, they get angry back. So it's a self-destructive emotion. So thanks for asking that question, because I actually am busy working on establishing a podcast where I'm going to be talking about issues like that. You know, I have teaching in my genes. My parents were both teachers, and I was gonna be a college professor, and I mentored a lot of people. I mentored not until I left the area. I mentored graduate students at Columbia University, and I like doing that. I like sharing what I've learned with others without telling them how to behave, just giving them ideas. And because any kind of behavior has to be owned by an individual themselves. You cannot tell them you got to be like this, you got to do that. But you open up, you know, if you do this, then this might happen. So that's where I'm going. And then it was almost like a setup. Thanks again for asking that question. And and oh, by the way, you are smart enough to mentor same age and younger kids, uh, because you're already way ahead of most of your contemporaries. You know, and you know, if you and it's very satisfying when you can help somebody, you know, embrace who they are and be more successful just by showing them uh, some of the things that will help them get there. Because we ourselves have a hard time getting us to know ourselves. I'm still working on that. I'm almost there.
Well, you know, there's a saying. I don't know its entirety, but I think it, it has to do with superpowers. It's, you know, if you want to find out your superpower, you have to show people theirs first, or you have to know how to show others theirs. Like, you know, it's something like that. But it does relate to what you're saying, though. You know, you have to be able to know how to show people their talents, and I do appreciate the compliment, for sure. And I want, now relating to the young people question, it's two questions, which is that if you do you have any regrets?
Well, with regard to what I did, and when I signed up for the KGB and became an enemy of the state that I know dearly love, no, because I knew what I knew then, and I made a decision based on what I thought I knew. So, but with regard to having done damage to one person who I love dearly, that's my German wife, who I broke a promise. I promised her that I would go back to Germany after about 10, 12 years, and we would have a phenomenal, happy life ever after. And I broke that promise, and I can't fix that. There's no way. And I didn't have promised my mother, and I didn't have a strong relationship with my mother. I didn't love her, and she didn't show me emotional love. But I still uh, regret that she didn't know what happened to me, because I was the golden boy in the family, and she was so proud of me. And then all of a sudden, I disappeared. That you don't do that. You don't do that to a parent who took care of you physically. She fed me, she clothed me, she also made me work in the kitchen and the garden, which is good. And she helped me discover ambition, which got me someplace in life. She just didn't know how to hug and kiss, but that was not unusual, because you know, East Germany, after the end of World War II, there was no time for emotions. You know, very few people. There was no luxury. It was a matter of survival, and that I realized only recently. So I'm still in my prayers. I ask Mother for forgiveness. These are the two things that I regret. Nothing else.
Now, my next question is relative to that, which is, if you had the opportunity to live your life all over again, right, in the same way, and you experience it from day one to now, doing everything the same, would you do it all again?
Well, in the same way, you mean I'm still born in Germany, East Germany, at the time of
Everything is done exactly the same. If you had the opportunity to relive your life, would you do it?
uh, yes. exactly, because again, we make decisions based on what we know when we know it. And now, having said that, sometimes we make decisions and sometimes others make decisions on our behalf. So for my life to unfold the way it did, actually some people made decisions that I had no influence over. I give you, you probably know that I stayed in the United States when they called me back to Russia, to East Germany, because I had fallen in love with my 18-month-old daughter. Now, my 18-month-old daughter came into being because her mother made a decision to get pregnant. We didn't discuss this. I didn't want to have a child. She stopped taking the pill because she wanted to, you know, I told her that once she has her green card, I married her, and once she has a green card, we get divorced again. And she liked to keep me, and so that was a weapon that worked really well. So that was one decision that somebody else made. Another decision that is very interesting to tell you. I think you might get a kick out of that. And I'm talking to you because of a number of other people, but the second most important decision was that a betrayal by an ex by um, by a employee of the KGB who worked in the KGB archives, who shared with the British intelligence that I exist. At that time, I was already done with spying. I had a great career in corporate America, made a lot of money, had a family, wife, 2 kids. And this guy had told MI6 there's a Jack Barsky in the northeast of the United States. And that is how the FBI found me. If the FBI doesn't find me, I'm not talking to you today because I had no intention of uh, informing the FBI of my past, because I had already lived for 9 years undetected. So I was going to just go into retirement as normal, regular American. So if this fellow by the name of Vasily Mitrokin, who betrayed me, was still alive today, I would get on my knees and thank him, because this allowed me to normalize self and get rid of the two personalities I had at one point, and allow me to just do some healing, because clearly there was a lot of damage done in my mind based on the dichotomy of having two personalities. So it's not just like, I was completely in charge. There were many other things, but where I could make a decision based on what I knew then, I would make the same decisions. I don't regret any of that.
So now I think, one of the last questions to ask would be, how or where do you find purpose in life now?
Where do I find purpose? I already shared that with you. This is what I'm working on. I have a passion for this now, and it evolved slowly. When initially some people told me that this should be something I should consider. Initially, somebody said you should have a podcast. I said, no way, it's a lot of work, and I also have to earn a living. The KGB doesn't pay my pension, so but then other people chimed in, and eventually I saw that it's not the podcast itself that earns you money. If Lex Friedman makes money running his podcast, but that's up there. But there's other ways to earn a living and still help people. And I'm when I got a hold of Jordan Peterson, and I noticed what he does, and he's rich by comparison. But he helps a lot of people. He helps a lot of young men like you specifically, and I think I can do that too. And we have fundamentally the same message. I spoke to him. He interviewed me for his podcast, and I shared with him that my mission is to do something very similar to what he does, except I have a different angle. You know, he's a super smart scientist, and when it comes to, you know, talking to men younger than me, not just young, very young men, generally men are younger than me. You know, I have the brand of having lived the life of a man. You see, the spy, but I also have, okay, and it's not about violence. It's not about James Bond stuff. It's about eventually. It's about the decisions I made that eventually got me to a point where I can honestly say I'm now a really good person. And it was a long path, and I learned a lot of lessons in the path. I made a lot of mistakes. So that is my passion, my mission. But when I talk about making money, I also have a young daughter. She's 13 years old. She is smarter than I am. I mean, she's a brilliant kid, and she was brilliant at the age of 2. I mean, I kept a diary where I wrote down some of the things she said at age 2, which there was abstract thinking going on already in her head. She has photographic memory. She can read. She can look at a half a page of something in a book and not read it, and then just tell you what's in it. And I want to, you know, gather enough money to for her to have a choice of schools to go to, college to go to, and I have a few years to do that, and that is my personal. It's my mission that is based on love for this child, the same way I love the child, the other daughter that I have, for whom I stayed in the United States. That's it, nothing else. I don't need expensive cars. I don't need to live in an expensive home. I would like to travel some more without going zigzag. So the travels that I made while a spider was always at least one stop before the destination, sometimes multiple stops. Travel, yeah, but you know, I I will be very fulfilled and happy if I can be successful in doing what I just explained to you that I'm just about to start, and I have a good team, two young men that are not much older than you, who who are who are, you know, social media savvy, technology savvy, and they know about marketing and so forth. So uh, that's I think that has a good chance of being successful. And if not, they got to go on and invent something else. Hold on, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. It shouldn't. I thought I had it on mute. Sorry about that.
All good. Yeah. Well, look, I absolutely appreciate you coming on. I wasn't even expecting you to message back. I'm gonna be quite honest. But you know, I'm so glad we got to do this. And
No, I had you have a great advantage. Like another guy's name popped into my head, Luke Basso, uh, the other high school student. Uh, your youth is a big advantage. If somebody like your age reaches out, how in the world should I say no? Because I have to acknowledge that you're taking an initiative, that you're showing bravery, you're showing interest, you're showing background knowledge that most everybody doesn't have. I need to honor this. The same way I once honored a handwritten note by a man who I thought was crazy because he went like, I mean, he was so complimentary, but I honored it by giving him a call. He's now my best friend. So, you know, there was no way that I could say no, no, and you don't know that you just did me a favor because you asked a bunch of questions that nobody else has asked that will help me to, you know, show young people that, you know, I've got something to say to them. Are you going to be on
yeah,
YouTube? Okay, good.
yeah,
Yep.
this is on YouTube.
Yeah, well,
But
see,
yeah,
I will market this this particular podcast actively. I don't market most of them, but this one's going to go on YouTube with my strong support.
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I do want to,
and I
yeah,
do
and I
this
want to,
out of selfishness.
don't we all? No,
Of
but
course. Here's the
Yeah.
thing that my friend from the retired FBI guy says. When it comes right down to it, all people make decisions that are either good for them or at least good for the folks that they care about, friends and family. And that doesn't mean, they're bad. This is how we operate as human beings. And yeah, and if your and mine idea of what's good for us in the past hour and some minutes, then we have synergy, and that's how teamwork operates.
Yeah. And I do want to stop the recording so we can talk a little bit after the show.
Yeah.
But do you have any final parting words to the audience?
Well, it was a delight to speak with another young man can ask interesting questions and has enough background to ask interesting questions. So, and the same as with the other fellow who, by the name of Luke Basso, I predict you have a bright future ahead of you, because I think you're ahead of the curve. I'm guessing you are maybe not a straight A student, but close to a straight A student.
I'm all right.
Okay, so maybe math is not so easy for you.
Yes, math is not my strong suit. It's funny that
Okay,
you say
that
that.
happens. And
Yeah.
and in my time, chemistry was the worst subject for most people, and I didn't have a problem with that. But you're a bright guy, so you're gonna be okay. And it's just one thing I forgot to mention, and if you could bring that back into the final product. One other thing I suggest to practically everybody, but particularly younger people, is somebody I never had. Get yourself a mentor. Now, sometimes it can be your father, but very often you need somebody who is more neutral, who has no stake in the game, who just wishes you well and wants to help you. Get yourself a mentor. If I had had a mentor, I would not be talking to you today. I would not have signed up for the KGB. And there's a number of other things I did that I wouldn't have done. I now have some people that do mentor me, but not one individual who is like my appointed mentor. But you got to get advice from others that would mean you well.
Right. And I mean, that's part of why I do the show. I mean, like, some of the stuff that I learned and that other people learned, and I'm still recording, by the way. I haven't stopped yet, but I was going to say that, that is part of one of the things I gained from doing this is just the fact that I've learned things that, the average person would not, just about, and this is in private conversations that I have with guests
Sure.
and just in general. It's like some of the stuff you learn is it's interesting, and it's not something that you would really gain from even social media or the media. You have to, like, it's from the source, right? Like,
yeah,
and that's pretty cool. And I like what I do. And again, I do want to stop the recording so we can talk after the show. But yeah. So, do you have any parting words before I press stop recording? I just want to clarify.
No, I'm really done. I think the one with the mentor. Thank God that you gave me that chance. But no, I'm none. Good luck to everybody.
All right. Sounds good. And it was great having you on. So yeah, just stay on the call. I'll just stop the recording.
So now